All right. Well, happy Thursday and welcome to our Thursday conversation. Uh, we, as a church, Aldersgate United Methodist Church, during the season of Lent, each week we are looking at an essential practice of the Christian faith. And this week, our essential practice is serving. We're looking at serving, and in particular, serving the marginalized, the vulnerable, the poor, serving the least of these, as Jesus puts it. And when I was thinking about this practice of serving, I thought of my friend Kevin Blue, and I thought, man, it'd be great to talk with Kevin about this. And so I bugged him. I said, Kevin, would you be free to hang out with me and have a little conversation on Thursday night? And graciously, he said yes. So I've got Kevin with me from his home in Los Angeles. And I'm going to introduce him a little bit before I hand the microphone over to him, so to speak. But thank you so much, Kevin, for being part of this. And Kevin is he's a husband. His wife, Jennifer, is in fact the acting senior pastor of their church. They've got 3 kids. Kevin's a pastor. He's a church planter. He is an author, and he at least was a ball player. I don't know if he is, but so when I don't know, is that true, Kevin?
It's been about a year since I played because of circumstances that we all understand, right? But yes, I do play some.
All right. So when I was a freshman at Occidental, Kevin was a senior. And Kevin, I got to know Kevin, and he mentored me and was just a good friend to me. One time at Occidental, I was an RA for this thing called the Multicultural Summer Institute. And Kevin was the HR. He was running the show. And, that was kind of the beginning of just pursuing Jesus together and being a part of what Jesus is doing in the world together. And so I've really appreciated just who Kevin is. And once again, just grateful that he could be here. And so, Kevin might, he could tell stories about me as a college student. Hopefully he won't do that. But
not today.
Not today.
Today. Yeah,
exactly. So, but Kevin really has, Kevin, you've given your life in many ways to urban ministry, and in particular to cross-cultural ministry in the city, and really in the city of LA. And so I want to first just ask you, where did that interest come from? Where did you get that spark? Were there particular people or particular experiences where you thought, I want to be about urban ministry. I want to be about loving the least and really being with God in the city?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting question because I think as I've looked back over these years now, being 55, maybe you do that a little bit more, right? And as I've done that, I think there are 2 things that really seem like they were foundational or something that kind of got me started. One of them was someone who was leading the college fellowship at that time that I was a part of, that you and I both were a part of. She was on staff there. Her name is Brenda Salter McNeil. So her interest in these kind of things, I think, drew me both into the group as well as got me going into this one summer experience that I had where I served. There were some kids in Pasadena. It was an urban program that InterVarsity Christian Fellowship was putting on. And so we went for 6 weeks, served there. It was really a kind of a catch-up program for kids who were behind. And that was at Franklin Elementary School. And I still remember Jessica and Draper and, just Miriam, a lot of those kids that I had in my class, and getting involved with their families and seeing the kind of educational situation that they had, and all in a lot of ways, in terms of just really practical, hands-on kinds of things like that. And so that was a really beautiful experience for me, and something inside me kind of clicked, I think, and sort of drew me in. So Brenda, I think, got me started in that and got me going and invited me to participate in that summer. But also, I mean, I can look back and just see God's handiwork in this. I mean, way before that, in a lot of ways, because I mean, poverty, education, these kind of things, they always mattered to me and to my family, and kind of the way God put me together. I think in terms of my school experiences and my family and all, I think even though the African American experience matters in particular to our family, but I think just race relations in the country, justice concerns, education, poverty, those kind of things, they touch my family. They touch lots of friends that I had. And so the kind of cross-cultural and cross-class situation that I grew up in, I think were some sovereign foundations that God gave me to give me a head start. So when it was time, I think those things could come to life more.
So I mean, share a little bit more. And I think there's you're cutting out a little bit sometimes, but we go with what we got as far as our connection. But freezing a little bit just at times. So, and I may be doing the same, who knows? But I'm curious.
Let me see if I can fix my no. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. You were just talking about some of those experiences for you, and like with just race, culture, even living in LA. Like, what are some of those sovereign foundations or experiences where you see God's hand even going before young adulthood or before college?
Yeah, I think it would be some of that would be the school that I went to, for example, was very cross-cultural. And so there were a lot of different friends that I developed that, friendships with folks from Asian backgrounds and a lot of different Asian backgrounds, some who had been in the United States for a long time, some who were recent immigrants. There were African American kids, there were Anglo kids, there were Latin American kids, some that were Latin American, like got here, first generation, some who had been here for, a few generations. So I think that mixture of people really gave me a great sensitivity to Los Angeles and its diversity, because LA and just Southern California in general, just kind of the base here, can be kind of there's a lot of different people, but it can kind of be pretty ghettoized in terms of like this group's here and that group's there, and even socially sometimes there can be some hostility and stuff like that, maybe especially in the streets, but those kind of things. I really had a heart for a variety of different kind of people and their concerns that God gave me early on. So, and that was kind of day to day. And a lot of the things that I think where I've seen people grow in these kinds of concerns and a heart for the unity of God's people, and, justice issues and things like that, have really been through these types of interactions where they catch a glimpse of somebody else's life, and all of a sudden it matters to them, right? And it sort of makes sense to them why someone would be having a hard time, or why a certain system works the way it does and favors some people and not others, or different things like that, right? So those kind of things were, my family knew them, right? My family knew some of those things, obviously, and helped me with that. But that came alive as I interacted with other people outside of my family, outside of our church. So in truth, the church that I grew up, and none of those things really mattered. So it's really my family where those things came to life, and then at school, and then it became part of really what God was doing, what God was about. I discovered in college.
Okay, yeah. So, and I'm gonna fast forward here. I told Kevin we're gonna have more of these conversations. This will not be our only one. But in 2003. You were part of a team that started a new church, Church of the Redeemer. And I know Aldersgate is our church. We're really thinking about how we can serve the community. How can we be engaged in it? How can we bless it? How can we serve it? But just share with us a little bit about why you started that church, where it is, why you started it, and what your vision was for it.
Yeah, this is Church of the Redeemer that I helped start and was the lead pastor of for 10 years. So, and we're a little bit west of USC. So we're kind of in that Exposition Park, Jefferson Park, that area, kind of almost Leimert Park, lots of parks. So it's a pretty mixed community, actually. And so for a long time, it was Anglo, had a Japanese presence here, turned African American, as did lots of these parts of Los Angeles. At one point, it became increasingly Latin American. So I think the vision for the church really got birthed out of my ministry at USC for a while there. And some of the students, as we tried to figure out how God would have us live and serve, we just recognized that a lot of the students on campus were kind of scared of the community around it, and it was sort of gated off. And so we began really with understanding that, hey, God's got us here in the city. It's not just doesn't stop at the gates where USC decided its property stops and was going to things off, but really we wanted to get to know neighbors and how we could be a part of what God was doing more broadly in this area. So that began some, different few churches around. And then as alumni, people graduated and alumni decided to stay in the area. And some people had some vision for starting something locally that might be a part of whatever God was doing. So that actually, the first group actually, got a couple of apartments, 4 people in the area. And that was right the same, maybe a week before the riots, in LA back in '92. And so, that really, I think, was a tough time for those folks. This was a mixed fellowship, but the people who moved out there into a largely Black and Latin American neighborhood were white and Asian. And so they took a lot of heat early on. But I think my heart and their hearts really wanted to see God do something local and wanted to see God bring some unity across some of the barriers and hostilities that were so evident in the riots. I mean, that was, before that, that I think God gave us that vision and heart. So, and that's really how the church has developed. It's developed as a local parish kind of ministry. And it's been cross-cultural. Our tagline is we're a multicultural family of faith in the community for the community. So most of our folks, maybe 70-80% of the members live within about maybe a square mile and a half, 2 miles of each other. So it's very much a local ministry. It's very much looking at seeing, it's being neighbors and then seeing what it is that's might benefit. What kind of kingdom work does God want to do here in this place?
Right. So if you go back to 92, you've got some USC students, folks coming out of that, white Asian students moving into the city. There's this racial tension. I mean, what were some of the challenges, I guess, early on, and some of the fears that people faced, and how did you kind of navigate that with them? And because I hadn't connected it, to that experience in LA at the time. But
yeah,
what was that like initially?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I think they were scared initially. So I didn't move over until '95. So that's when I moved in the neighborhood, or moved, off campus, right, to further out from campus to the neighborhood more. And so I played more of an advisory role to the group prior to that. And I think we didn't decide actually to start a church until, a couple of years after that, and then became an independent congregation. But I think people were scared, right? And rightly so. They were threatened. So, I mean, that was a time in this particular area where the Bloods and Crips were going at it also. So there were plenty of shootings around, a number of homicides, that kind of thing. They had those first 4 people and moved in, had had a bullet go through their wall, right? So, I mean, it was all kinds of things, and some of it was the cultural dissonance, right? Those four folks came from middle class families, and so, and the cultural and then educational and those some of those kind of differences that really I think people struggle to make friends early. So they prayed a lot. As a matter of fact, they committed the first I think entire year to dominantly praying. They didn't really do a lot other than they helped some folks who were drunk and in the gutter up and house them at times. So, but they didn't really like go for a big project. They didn't start a tutoring thing. They didn't do, you know, they were just kind of trying to get to know folks and praying, asking God to help them understand what it meant to be there and what He was already doing. And that was, I think, foundational for us. And prayer has always been, I think, foundational for us. I think we feel like it's important to be led forward by God and not just gin up some things to do, right?
Right. So coming out of that prayer and that just I hear you saying you from the beginning. It's like we're locally based. We've got a neighborhood, we've got an area. We want to bless this community, these people, and if you live 10 miles away, great. But our focus is on this neighborhood, this community.
Right.
So what were some of the steps that have been taken? Because I think, in theory, I think all churches are saying we want to bless our community. We want to serve it. We want to be agents of transformation in it, reconciliation in it. But just at a practical level, coming out of that prayer and discernment process, what were some of the steps that the church began to take to serve and to just be a presence there?
Right. I mean, well, I think one of the first things that we came upon really was, I think we found something that at least I think a lot of the church, at least maybe in the U.S. in big cities, has lost, and that's a sense of spirituality of place. And so I think that's well captured. Yeah, I think there's, I think the scripture appreciates that the people of God are given a place, and they care for it. But I think we're such a commuter, people drive everywhere, or we do things. So the idea that God would have us be really involved in whatever the issues are locally and to network and witness and really develop a certain area and that we would live there, right? So, so that idea of incarnation in that way, that we would be a part of whatever the struggles are. So like, that we were going to live here and we weren't going to, try to, in a certain sense, distance ourselves from the needs and problems and issues that everybody else in this neighborhood faced. So we've had people who've had their homes burglarized. We've had people who've, over the years, especially in those early years, folks who like I said, have been threatened. There's been gang activity. There's drug sales that are happening on the corner across from my apartment. So all those kinds of safety concerns, the educational concerns that every parent has, we have. And so we adopt those concerns along with them. So there's a real, I think, appreciation for the place and entering into the lives of everybody else here and having those shared concerns and then trying to see what will God do, with those. So I think that that was an important early step. And to this day, our ministry activity is focused on where, the dominant part of our congregation lives. So for example, we incorporated, this was a few years down the road, but we incorporated a nonprofit, and it's a Christian nonprofit. And that was kind of a way that we decided we would partner with a variety of other, institutions around locally, right? Because some folks don't want to work with a church, but they might work with a Christian nonprofit. And that's been fruitful. USC has become, desirous of funding certain educational activities for children in this neighborhood. So that's been a source of blessing. And we've seen, a generation of folks now grow up, and some folks behind 2 years, so I mean, it's really a beautiful thing that God did there. Also, then, it got us into this whole neighborhood drilling thing, dealing with oil companies that are doing illegitimate, illegal work in much of South LA, and certainly they have 2 drill sites in our parish, and we began to work with the councilman and a bunch of neighbors about that. We started dealing with liquor stores, right? People were scared to come out of their house because the liquor stores, it's the one in particular, and there was at the beginning kind of, at ground zero where we were doing a lot of our, where we were living and neighbors were, just a lot of shootings, and LAPD's up there all the time, and there's a lot of activity, that's out there, a lot of cash, drug trades happening. So it began just to be addressing those issues, right, and trying to find out with neighbors how to do that. So none of us had any specialties in dealing with any of those things.
Mm-hmm.
There was no political, we had city council folks who were not at all interested in helping with any of those things. So there wasn't a constituency that had money that they wanted, or votes that they wanted, and so they just sort of disregarded a lot of that, even though we would go and talk to them about it so early on. So yeah. God kind of, over time, again, it required some patience, and so God over time really helped us be patient and have some long suffering and gain wisdom and kind of go with it, and He worked those things out. So there's some liquor store. I can tell you some stories. There's some liquor stores that got closed. There's some, safety. There are beautification projects that got done. There's an oil site, a drill site that's getting shut down now, and I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar oil company, and you have this little church, right? but God decided He was going to work that out, right? And so they're closing that site up, and and then we'll work on the other one, which is the second neighborhood.
All right.
So so it's different things like that. We just kind of found out along the way.
Right. Yeah. We had someone ask, how did you know where to begin? And you've talked about prayer, and it sounds like there was a process of listening as well to the community members. And is there any other thoughts you have on it's just where to begin is huge, right? And even just the location or the needs. Any other, I guess, wisdom on those discerning which needs or which needs to address, or even which people to support?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll probably just offer a couple of pieces that I think have been wisdom for us over the years about that. I think if we're driven by the needs, I think that's a losing fight, right? So the needs don't define the call. So I think we really have to ask the question, where would God have us start? So that in itself is a great question. Where would God have us start? Not where do we want to start? What seems like is most important? What does somebody else think? But trying to pray and listen. And God speaks in a variety of ways, right? I mean, if we've been walking with the Lord for a while, we know that. But some of that, what we hear, is our own desires, right, and our own, whatever angle on things. So I didn't have some particular interest or angle on doing anything with the drill site, but God just kind of showed us that one day through a variety of conversations and some experiences that neighbors had, and then an interaction that we had with the community liaison from the oil company, and it just became so clear. The Holy Spirit was just so in that, and so we just took another step, and God, continued to work with us in that way. So I don't think it certainly is not by analysis. So an analysis of the areas or whatever it is, and just say, okay, God, that's the answer. God would have us do that. So I don't think it's that simple. So I think as Americans, it's easy for us. We want a system. We want to move something fast. We want a project. We want to, change something, right? But I think really taking some opportunity to listen to God and be patient and see what it is that He wants to open up to us. That's our part, right, of it, and working with other folks in that. And that's been a great source of outreach for us, and connection with neighbors. We've also certainly seen some persecution and hostility, right? So even in the process of doing good.
Mm-hmm. So what has, I guess, two questions. What have been some of those challenges, some of the persecution, but also like what's kept you going? What's kept you from quitting? Because when I think about folks who are doing urban ministry, I think a lot of us, the idea is appealing, but the reality is not. It's like, I love the concept, but to live it out and to stick with it over year after year, that's the grit, and because I know a lot of folks who maybe started out and then said, hey, once I got married, probably not going to be in the city, or if I've got kids, probably not going to be in the city. And I've never lived, in an urban setting like you're living. And so what's kept you from quitting?
Well, I mean, there's an easy Sunday school answer to that, right? So, and then I could, maybe I should explain it more. So I could just say God, right? So God kept me from quitting. So yeah, I mean, I didn't have any intention of doing this when I went to college. When I came out of college, I mean, college, I had no angle on, oh yeah, this is something for me to do. So I do think you're right. That I've seen a lot of people come and go, and some of those folks have come and gone for good reasons, because God doesn't have us always stay in the same place all the time. Sometimes it's time to move on and do something else. But some of those folks were out, right? And I think we're kind of burnt out and that kind of thing, but and could not sustain, and so needed to leave because of that. Other folks, I think, left because they felt the call and the struggle of, I'm married now. So, and if I, as a guy, so, I'm married now. How do I feel about my wife being in the neighborhood, right? And with the risks that are involved in that. Or now I have kids. I've got 3, right? So, how do I feel about them being here when they're little, or when they're in the educational system, right? How do I feel about that? So, but the sad thing about it to me, in terms of what I hear at times from folks, is that other generations, I think, applauded when missionaries went to the field, and left their local environment, and went to some other country, and had spouse and children, and even if they died in the field, would have applauded their service and their commitment to God. So, but people question the wisdom of a sense of call to these kinds of environments that are local, that are part of our country, right? So, and for Americans to come work in their own, risky environments, that all of a sudden, that's you're not being a good dad. Oh, how can you put your wife, I mean, it's just nonsense, right? So, so some of it's that, and some of it I hear from folks, it's people feel like, oh, I love what you're doing. It's kind of edgy. A buddy of mine had somebody say this to them. Oh, I love it. It's kind of gritty. I like that. I just wish you could do it somewhere else. I'm like, that's kind of the point, right? Is to be here and to have it be part. This is somebody who's coming from outside, right, from a suburb, right, to come and join. So I would just say, I mean, God certainly has helped me, because one thing I'll say is, I think, and this is true in discipleship. So wherever God calls us, because He didn't call everybody to do exactly what I'm doing, but wherever He calls us, you will be required to face your fears, and the ministry that He calls you to, it will touch the pain that you have in your own life. So you'll have some persecution from outside, but you'll also have a journey that's inside. And if you're unwilling to go walk with God in that journey, that inside journey, the inner journey with God, then I think you won't last for very long. So, and you'll have to go somewhere else, because the challenges will require that. It requires an inner journey. So we can't just have an outward journey of service. It's got to be an inward journey of intimacy with Jesus. That God's got to meet us in that way and equip us and heal us and strengthen us to be able to give ourselves, right? So it's out of the overflow of our hearts and our life with God that we give what God's given to us. So I just say, He's worked with me over the years, and there have been a lot of tears. There have been lots of times when I've been angry. Lots of times we've been on our knees about our kids. So and I care. I love my wife, right? So my mother-in-law lives with us now. So, and so we're caring for her in the midst of this pandemic. So I mean, she immigrated from Taiwan. My parents worked for a generation to get us out of neighborhoods like this. So for me to go back in, I mean, the challenges obviously are familial, they're historical, so all kinds of things. God has sustained me in the midst of that. And it's only been because of his call, because all those other things, whether it's people's commentary or, the economics or whatever, those are draws to send me elsewhere. And even my own, need for healing and pain from the past and, issues in life in our society, those things could take me elsewhere. So but God's helped me stay. But it has been a rigorous discipleship. So which I would probably argue should be everyone's discipleship, though maybe not all doing exactly what I'm doing.
Right. Yeah. But yeah. And that's, I think we got my good friend and co-pastor Ken Sir saying, so good. The outward journey takes us an inward journey. I think that's really, I like the way you say that, and I think that's one of our goals for this series, right? Is because it's called The Walk. What we're doing right now is called The Walk, and it's these practices that help us in our walk with God. And so I'm going to close with this question. I'm not even going to get into the racial reconciliation. I'm going to wait. I'm just putting more of that over here because I want more time on that one. So, but I guess I just want to close. How have you, and it may be an experience, but where you've had that intimacy. You talked about intimacy with God, and how has the outward journey, or how has the choice to do urban ministry and to love the least the way you're doing, how has that deepened or developed your walk with God and that inward journey or that intimacy with God from your experience?
Let's see. I'm drawn to tell a story, but maybe I'll say something general first. I think the only way to have the kind of long suffering that we're commended to in the New Testament is to suffer long. So, and that requires that I have a certain intimacy with Jesus, where I know where I can go with my pain. And if I'm not real with God like that, so in my prayer times, if I'm not real like that with my emotions with God, I think I'm just not going to get very far. I won't last very long, and I'll have a rather shallow discipleship that really doesn't know the presence and power of God as the Scripture attests to. So I think for me, the kinds of I have a set of quiet practices, right? So as much as I think I appreciate the streams of justice and the charismatic streams of the Christian faith and certainly the service and those kinds of things. So I think the contemplative side of Christian spirituality is deeply needed. It's something it's a stream that I have to swim in. And some of that has been certainly worship. It's been gospel-oriented music at times for me that really meets my soul. And people don't think about that as being a quiet discipline because people can be loud, but it's repetitive. And some of the choruses and things like that, you sing them and you swim in them until your soul gets in them, right? And so the hymns help me. But I swim in the choruses and things like that of some of the spirituals and the gospel songs that really, I think, have been deeply meaningful to me over the years. So I have a practice of silence. I have some solitude, as much as we can be quiet in the city, in this noisy world, as much as I can find some solitude from my 3 crazy children, and, and all the needs, right, that are around. I try to take that time, right? I think finding the intimacy with God that I have in actually taking a Sabbath. So I take a day when I'm not going to address the needs. And I mean, if there's an emergency, sure. So, but you know what? Everything's not an emergency. And I think our congregation knows that that's kind of how we're going to roll. And so they're also in the practice of rest. So those kind of things are ways that God, I think, has met me over the years. They're invitations, right, for God to minister to me. But I'll tell you this story. You got time?
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
So this is a personal story, and I don't usually share it, but I feel stirred to share it now, so I will. So when I was one of the tougher things that's been for me has been the challenge of having my wife, who's, as you mentioned, is the lead pastor now. She's the acting lead pastor of our church, but having her minister with me in this environment and see her struggle and be threatened or not treated very well, right? By threatened, there hasn't been a threat of physical violence, but treated poorly, right? And in a way that I think pains her greatly, right? So and the reason why it was a challenge for me, excuse me, was because two things. One was when I was in middle school, my mother was assaulted. And she was assaulted. You know, again, wasn't something I had anything. I wasn't around. It was at her workplace. She was a school teacher, and she was sexually assaulted at school. And I hadn't really dealt with that. You know, we didn't deal with the family. I think I told that story. She told me that had happened. I think because there was a court case coming up, and she thought it might be in the press or somebody might say something to me about it. But as a family, we never really debriefed that or worked with it. And so I think I was really angry for a while, half a week, and then there wasn't any place to go with that. And so it just stayed inside. And so I think the challenge that God, I think, put before me was the way that I was experiencing my wife being treated and her pain over that. It touched that pain in my rights from that earlier experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it was very difficult for me because because I can't, husband, and as a disciple, I can't object to the fact that my wife needs to have the share of suffering that's hers for the gospel, and that, right, to walk with her in that. But I can't and should not seek to prevent her from experiencing difficulty and challenge. Now that's a real challenge for me, and it was a real challenge for me because of that experience, especially earlier. So, and I feel that way about, you know, I'm very, very particular about taking care of and watching out for the women in our neighborhood, in our church, as we've gone through the years here. So, but it came from that, and so when that kind of stuff happened for my wife, it was a doorway into some of the pain that was in my life earlier, but it was an invitation from God to a deeper intimacy and trust of Him and some healing from that experience from when I was younger, right? That I didn't know I needed. That was not an issue, you know, but it was in me, right? But it was that difficulty and that challenge was a doorway into that kind of deeper experience of God. And that is, again, I wouldn't trade it. So, and I could tell you 20 stories like that, right? But that's kind of one that for some reason, I think the Lord brought to mind in this moment. Maybe that's for somebody who's listening or will listen. But
Right.
but that kind of thing, it's not, we can't run from that. We shouldn't run from that, right? We should take that as an invitation from God. I'm struggling with this, and I'm really angry, and I feel, you know, anxious about all this. It's kind of scared. Why is that? What's happening for me? It was an invitation to that deeper journey with Jesus and the touch of His Holy Spirit in my life, again, that I'm very grateful for. So in the midst of the ministry, right?
Wow. Yeah. Oof. Well, thank you for sharing, you know, just even that example, and you're living out that deeper journey. Because I mean, as a husband, you know, I you know, as a father, like that touches, you know, that touches where so many of us live, and seeing what God is doing in your life, but also, you know, I think there's so much for me that wants to just protect those around me from suffering. And I appreciate your word about long suffering and being willing to be in that place and learn from God and meet God in the midst of that. So just really appreciate you sharing that closing story. Appreciate you sharing this time with us. I am going to wrap it up there, and we will have another conversation. So I want to thank you, Kevin, for being with us. And we got Cindy saying thank to you as well. So I know for those of you listening, I appreciate it. I know it's been kind of glitchy. I hope and I pray that you will have heard God speak to you through this time. And so thank you once again, Kevin. And I look forward to another conversation. So blessings to you, brother.
Have a great.
All right. Take care. Bye, all.